Tonight, we begin with a security development that European defense officials had feared, dismissed, and prepared for simultaneously. An explosion that unfolded not over days or weeks, but in 17 minutes. 17 minutes that shattered the morning calm along the Belarus-Lithuania border. 17 minutes that triggered automatic NATO Article 4 consultations. 17 minutes that forced Lithuania to implement its most severe lockdown protocols since the Cold War. What Belarus did today crossed a line that Munich security experts had hoped would hold through winter. And when that line broke, Lithuania did not hesitate. They responded with speed, precision, and devastating clarity. For 3 weeks now, there had been signals, not from official channels, not from diplomatic sources, just signals that Belarus was preparing something unprecedented. Lukashenko's regime has been unpredictable, yes, but they have been methodical in their unpredictability. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a choreography. But what set off alarm bells in Munich this morning was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Belarusian military movements know the indicators. The repositioning of special units, the unusual communications blackouts, the evacuation of key personnel from border regions, the sudden disappearance of Wagner Group advisors. All of that went quiet 72 hours ago. And whenever Lukashenko goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. The Munich Security Conference, already convened for its emergency winter session, had been tracking unusual activity along the Belarusian border for days. German intelligence sources speaking through back channels described a buildup that didn't match any known exercise pattern. These weren't regular troops conducting winter drills. These were specialized units, the kind Belarus only deploys when Moscow gives specific orders. Early this morning, Lithuanian border sensors detected what they described as a significant explosive event, including seismic readings that had not been registered in over 30 years. These are the kinds of explosions that Belarus only triggers when they are signaling something very specific: desperation, escalation, or provocation. NATO observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Belarus was changing its entire border posture. And when an authoritarian regime shifts posture without explanation, even by a few kilometers, Brussels pays attention. The explosion occurred at 0547 local time, precisely at grid reference 54.70 Grin, 25.3 DGE, a critical junction where Belarus, Lithuania, and Poland nearly converge. This wasn't random. This location has been a flashpoint for migrant pushes, smuggling operations, and now apparently something far more sinister. Initial reports suggested a weapons depot accident. But within minutes, Lithuanian intelligence confirmed what Munich had feared. This was deliberate. The blast pattern, the timing, the location, everything pointed to a calculated provocation designed to test NATO's newest member state responses and create plausible deniability for whatever comes next. The warning issued by Munich tonight was not normal, it was not routine, it was not symbolic, it was urgent. Source after emergency meeting described Belarus's move as calculated, dangerous, and perhaps most importantly, potentially coordinated with larger Russian objectives. But provocation only works if the target hesitates. Lithuania did not. In fact, their response today was among the fastest we've seen in post-Soviet Europe. Here's what we know. Within 40 minutes of the explosion, Lithuania activated Protocol 7. These weren't ordinary border reinforcements. These were rapid reaction forces, units that Lithuania only deploys when they are preparing to repel an actual incursion. President Gitanas Nausėda didn't wait for Brussels to deliberate. He didn't wait for Washington to weigh in. He ordered immediate implementation of what Lithuanian defense officials call fortress mode, a comprehensive lockdown that transforms the entire border region into a militarized zone. Tonight, NATO sources confirmed that Lithuania launched immediate countermeasures on 3 fronts, including electronic warfare systems that had recently been upgraded for what analysts believe was exactly this scenario. Lithuania acted before Belarus could escalate further. They sealed the Medininkai crossing. They sealed the Shalchininkai junction. They sealed secondary routes that were likely preparing to channel staged migrant groups. In other words, Lithuania targeted every potential vector of hybrid warfare, the infrastructure that would have made it operational. This is what made Munich's warning so urgent. Belarus's explosion wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could trigger wider regional instability if left unchecked. And Lithuania, understanding that fully, responded with force, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't just reinforce existing positions. They didn't just increase patrols. They activated systems that hadn't been used since independence. They deployed capabilities that NATO had quietly positioned there months ago. The response included immediate deployment of German Bundeswehr units stationed nearby as part of NATO's enhanced forward presence. These aren't peacekeepers. These are combat-ready battalions specifically trained for rapid border defense scenarios. And here's where the story becomes even more complex. Intelligence sources now believe that Belarus's latest move was designed to test the cohesion of NATO after months of focus on other global crises. Lukashenko wanted to see whether Europe would hesitate while distracted. But instead, the opposite happened. NATO didn't fragment. They responded with unity that was so swift, so coordinated that even Moscow noticed. You don't get Putin's attention easily. But today, Lithuania did. Military analysts speaking with European media under anonymity describe Belarus's shift as probing, a way to identify weaknesses in NATO's eastern flank. But Lithuania proved today that they remain both vigilant and capable. Their actions were not only defensive, they were calibrated so precisely that they avoided giving Belarus any propaganda victory. That precision matters because it shows strategic maturity. It shows that Lithuania is not simply a NATO protectorate. They are a sophisticated defense partner capable of independent action. What makes this response particularly significant is the technology Lithuania deployed. Sources confirm the activation of Israeli-designed border monitoring systems, American electronic warfare packages, and indigenous drone swarms developed specifically for this type of hybrid threat. As reports continued coming in throughout the morning, we learned more about the scale of Lithuania's response. Special operations forces carried out immediate reconnaissance missions, forcing Belarusian units to pull back from forward positions. Air defense systems targeted surveillance drones that had been increasingly active in the last 72 hours. Cyber defense teams operating from Vilnius reportedly disrupted communication networks used by Belarusian forces to coordinate border activities. This wasn't just border reinforcement. This wasn't just diplomatic protest. This was integrated defense. This was multi-domain deterrence. And deterrence is the one thing Belarus has struggled to overcome since the failed 2020 revolution. For every provocation they have attempted, Lithuania has countered with something that raises the cost of escalation. The scope extends beyond military measures. Lithuania simultaneously suspended all border crossing agreements, evacuated civilians from a 5-kilometer zone, activated emergency broadcast systems in 4 languages, coordinated with Poland to seal their mutual borders with Belarus. Remember, Belarus thought NATO would be divided. They thought European resolve would be exhausted. They thought winter would make rapid response impossible. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. NATO is unified. European resolve is hardening. Winter preparations that began in September are now paying dividends. This moment carries historical weight that cannot be ignored. Lithuania, once forcibly incorporated into the Soviet Union, now stands as NATO's front line against neo-Soviet aggression. The same forests that once hid partisan fighters now conceal some of NATO's most advanced surveillance technology. The explosion site itself holds dark history. It's less than 50 kilometers from Vilnius, Lithuania's capital. During World War II, this region saw massive population displacement. During the Cold War, it hosted Soviet military installations. Now it's become the flashpoint for a new kind of confrontation. What makes this moment so dangerous, and so unpredictable, is that Belarus's latest move happened at a time when Lukashenko is under unprecedented pressure. Moscow wants more aggressive action against NATO. Wagner remnants want payment and protection. The Belarusian military wants to avoid direct confrontation. The Belarusian people want regime change. Lukashenko is balancing these demands while facing economic collapse. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The economic situation in Belarus has deteriorated dramatically. Inflation exceeds 40%. Foreign reserves are nearly depleted. The explosion today might have been as much about domestic distraction as international provocation, but that makes it more dangerous, not less. Desperate regimes take desperate actions. And Lukashenko, increasingly isolated even from Moscow, appears to be gambling with regional stability to maintain his grip on power. Munich's emergency statement, now distributed across secure channels, was designed to signal that Europe is not willing to tolerate hybrid warfare escalation. German officials said plainly that Belarus's action was inconsistent with international law and regional stability. That is diplomatic language for, "We see what you're doing and there will be consequences." You don't usually hear that tone from Berlin unless something serious is at stake. Chancellor Scholz, interrupting his scheduled agenda, convened an emergency meeting of the German Security Council. The last time this happened outside of scheduled sessions was during the initial invasion of Ukraine. That parallel is not lost on anyone in Brussels or Moscow. French President Macron has already spoken with President Nauseda twice today. British forces in Estonia are on elevated alert. The entire NATO eastern flank is watching and waiting. Meanwhile, Lithuania's President Nauseda addressed the nation in a calm, determined speech tonight. He said, "Lithuania has faced threats before. We have never yielded." He said, "Our borders are sovereign. Our response is proportional." And he said, "We stand with our allies and our allies stand with us." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a leader that understands just how high the stakes have become. The president spoke in Lithuanian, Russian, and English, a deliberate choice meant to communicate with multiple audiences simultaneously. His message to Lithuanian citizens was reassurance. His message to Belarus was deterrence. His message to NATO was resolve. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Belarus's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the border explosion, Russian forces also increased activity in Kaliningrad. Wagner-affiliated groups activated networks in Moldova. Cyber attacks increased targeting Baltic infrastructure. All of this happened within the same 6-hour window. When authoritarian regimes move multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Intelligence services across Europe are now working to determine whether this was coordinated or coincidental. The timing suggests coordination. The execution suggests preparation. The target suggests a deliberate attempt to stress NATO's decision-making processes. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Belarus is preparing another manufactured migrant crisis. Another is that Belarus is attempting to create justification for permanent militarization of the border. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Belarus is attempting to draw Lithuania into a direct confrontation that could be used to test Article 5. But today, Lithuania took that card off the table. They didn't overreact. They didn't escalate unnecessarily. They didn't provide any pretext for Belarusian propaganda. They responded with measured force that demonstrates capability without provocation. This balance is crucial. Belarus wants to portray Lithuania as aggressive. Lithuania's response today was forceful enough to deter, but measured enough to maintain international support. It's a delicate balance that they've managed expertly. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Belarus wants to see if NATO will crack. Lithuania wants to show that NATO solidarity remains intact. Brussels wants to prevent regional escalation, and Moscow wants to prevent NATO from appearing stronger. Each actor is calculating their next move based on how others respond. Lithuania's swift action today has already influenced those calculations. Belarus expected hesitation. They got determination. That changes everything. Tonight, we've heard from sources who are now monitoring unprecedented military movement across the region. They say Belarus has begun moving additional units toward the border. They say Russian electronic warfare systems in Kaliningrad have gone active. And they say Belarus's decision to detonate explosives at the border is likely part of a broader strategy intended to create multiple crisis points simultaneously. But Lithuania is not standing alone. In fact, Lithuania is receiving immediate support. Their response today, swift, measured, and coordinated, sent a message to Minsk that provocations will not go unanswered. And it sent a message to Brussels that the eastern flank remains vigilant. Polish forces have moved to their highest readiness level. Latvian and Estonian units are coordinating joint patrols. The entire Baltic region is demonstrating that an attack on one truly is considered an attack on all. As the night goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Belarus hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Lithuania's response was timely. It prevented potential infiltration, it demonstrated NATO readiness, and it avoided unnecessary escalation. What happens next will depend on what Belarus does in the next 24 hours. If they pull back, this moment will be remembered as another failed provocation. If they escalate, NATO has already shown they are prepared. They have shown they are ready to respond. The next few hours will be critical. Munich security officials remain in emergency session. NATO's North Atlantic Council is meeting continuously, and Lithuania maintains its lockdown while the world watches. And tonight, for the first time in months, Belarus appears to be recalculating. Minsk is quiet, too quiet, And when Lukashenko is quiet, it means he is weighing options. It means he is choosing his next move carefully, because tonight Belarus learned something they should have already known. NATO's eastern flank is not weak. Lithuania's resolve is not theoretical, and Europe's patience is not infinite. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The explosion that was meant to divide has united. The provocation that was meant to weaken has strengthened, and the test that was meant to reveal vulnerability has instead revealed resolve. Munich's confirmation of the nightmare scenario, a deliberate attack on NATO's border, has triggered exactly the opposite response Belarus expected. Instead of confusion, there is clarity. Instead of hesitation, there is action. Instead of division, there is unity. Lithuania's lockdown is not just a defensive measure, it's a statement that says the Baltic states are no longer the vulnerable periphery of Europe. They are the capable, determined, and united frontier of the free world. And we will be here, watching every detail as the next phase unfolds. The border may have exploded this morning, but tonight it is Belarus that finds itself contained.